The days of Noah. This will be a Bible-based evaluation of the days of Noah parable found in Matthew 24. Presented by myself, Richard L. Guthrie. Matthew records an interesting parable that Jesus presents regarding the end times. Matthew 24, verses 37 to 39. But as the days of Noah were, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. For as in the days that were before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day that Noah entered into the ark, and knew not until the flood came and took them all away. So shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. Many use this parable as a springboard and use it as a type or an example of a pre-tribulational rapture. This study will evaluate whether this is a correct or an accurate assessment of this parable. Before I go any further, there are some basic rules I've applied to this study. Read the scriptures carefully. Do not add anything that is written, what is written, and do not omit anything that is written. And I've stayed with the King James Version for all my references and will not deviate from that. For more information regarding this topic and other related topics, I highly recommend my book, The Rapture from the Ground Up. Noah is often used as an example of the rapture. This argument is usually based on the concept that God will not or can't allow the church to go through the tribulation. The tribulation is to be a time of God's judgment and extreme wickedness on the earth. God didn't judge the wicked in Noah's day until Noah and his family were all safely sealed inside the ark. No rain fell, and the fountains of the deep were stayed until Noah and his family entered the ark, with God sealing the door. 1 week later, the flood began, and the wicked were utterly destroyed. In summary, before the execution of divine judgment, God supposedly removes the righteous and then judges the unrighteous. Noah and the ark are presented as one example of such occasion where this occurs. We have to review all Scripture when evaluating this parable. It is unwise and dishonest to cherry-pick phrases and verses to merely support a given concept. Remember that God does promise that He knows how to deliver the godly when required. This is found in 2 Peter chapter 2, verses 5 and also 9. And God spared not the old world, but saved Noah, the eighth person, a preacher of righteousness, bringing in the flood upon the world of the ungodly. The Lord knoweth how to deliver the godly out of temptations, and to reserve the unjust unto the day of judgment to be punished. Let's look at the exact text of these verses for this parable. The reference parable, Matthew 24, 37 to 39, does not say that Noah was delivered from the judgment or was spared from the judgment. It will later be demonstrated that this parable is more of an example of deliverance through rather than from the flood. Let's evaluate the flood from Noah's perspective. Only 8 people entered into the ark. Look at the genealogies of all the other patriarchs. Noah must have had many other sons and daughters who did not enter into the ark with him. Of course, that's reasonable speculation here. Most of Noah's family, his brothers, sisters, uncles, aunts, cousins, possibly his mother, etc., did not enter into the ark. Noah was sealed up in the ark for 1 week without anything happening. Genesis chapter 7, verses 7 and 10. The flood buffeted the ark around for at least 40 days and 40 nights. It is possible that Noah heard the screams of terror, or maybe the scratching of fingernails on the outside of the ark, or heard people desperately clinging to the outside of the ark. Of course, that's speculation here too. Noah was confined to be inside the ark for over a year. It must have been almost like an imprisonment. Noah emerged from the ark to a world totally devastated. The smell of decaying vegetation and rotting flesh had to fill the air. Perhaps it was better than being confined inside the ark with all those animals for a year, but it couldn't have been pleasant. The Garden of Eden environment he had lived in for 600 years was totally removed. All of Noah's possessions, except for what he took on the ark, were lost. Noah no longer had any social life. The flood took that away. Noah and his family had to start life from the ground up, building shelters, planting crops, making tools that they did not bring with them, etc. Water no longer sprang up like a mist. Genesis 2:6. Seasons and weather patterns were something new and had to be learned and accommodated. It is no wonder that Noah went on a drinking bench the first chance he had after the flood. It was a very depressing situation that I don't think any of us could really imagine in its entirety. It is quite apparent that Noah's life was spared from the flood, but it is also obvious that Noah did not get through the flood unscathed. A raptured church gets to spend eternity with Jesus and is given a glorified body, pretty much unscathed. In this sense, Noah is not an example for a church being raptured before the tribulation. If anything, Noah would be a better example, as stated in 2 Peter 2:9, of how God can deliver the church through the tribulation. Jesus said that the coming of the Son of Man will be like the days of Noah. The story of the flood is supposed to be a perfect type of the rapture. This is because Enoch wasn't mentioned by Jesus. He only mentioned Noah. Please note that the focus Jesus provided was on unbelievers and not believers. Let's look at Luke 16, verses 26 and 27. And as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it also be in the days of the Son of Man. They did eat, they drank, they married wives, they were given in marriage until the day that Noah entered into the ark, and the flood and came and destroyed them all. Let's look at the setting of Noah and the condition of the world just before the flood. Genesis 6:5. And God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. Man's wickedness abounded to such an extent that God decided to destroy mankind. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Genesis 6:8. The flood is said to be a type of the tribulation, God's wrath. God judged the world with the flood, the wrath of the tribulation, which is actually the wrath that the believers see in the tribulation is from Antichrist and Satan and other unbelievers. The judgment, God's judgment, is not God's wrath on believers, it's God's wrath on unbelievers. But anyway, and destroyed all the humans because of their wickedness. Enoch, in Genesis 5:24, was translated to heaven or raptured, so that serves as a type of the rapture of the church before the flood, or the tribulation. As Noah and the ark go through the flood with God's protection, this typifies Israel when they hide in the wilderness for 1,260 days during the tribulation. God told Noah to build an ark big enough for him, for his family, 2 of every unclean animal, 7 of every clean animal, and supplies. I'm sure that there was room for others, since Noah preached the word of the coming event. See 2 Peter 2 and verse 5. Let's look at those who were saved on the ark. We know that Noah was a believer, Genesis 6:8. What about Shem, Ham, and Japheth? Ham's conduct was less than godly. Check out Genesis 9, verses 20 to 23. Ham's family was cursed because of that sin that he did to his father, Noah. None of the 4 wives were provided with names. Ungodly women are never identified in the Bible. For example, Job's and Lot's wife. It is likely, though speculation that none of the 4 wives were believers. At least 5 members of the ark are suspect as to whether they were believers or not. We know only that Noah was a believer. So the type of the pre-tribulational rapture has unbelievers and believers being preserved through the tribulation. This begins to look less credible as being a type of a pre-tribulational rapture. Enoch is supposed to be a type of the rapture since he was translated prior to the flood, Genesis 5:24. What is never discussed is the fact that Enoch was translated into heaven 669 years before the flood. Please note that Elijah was translated into heaven about 1452 years after the flood. Using the same logic, Elijah would represent a post-tribulational rapture of the church. The simple fact is that Enoch's translation is too far removed from the event of the flood to have any credible relevance. The preceding scenario falls short of establishing the flood and Noah as being a type of a pre-tribulational rapture of the church. There are several arguments that rule against this parable being a type of rapture. All unbelievers do not perish during the tribulation, but they all die in the flood. Many unbelievers become believers in the tribulation. With the flood, there was no second chance or possibility of salvation offered to any of those outside of the ark. Revelation 7 verse 4. What represents those that come to a saving knowledge of Christ during the tribulation? 8 people entered the ark and 8 people exited the ark over a year later. Enoch was removed from the earth 669 years before the flood. Using the same reasoning, Elijah would represent a post-tribulational rapture of the church, being removed about 1452 years after the flood. What represents the dead believers who will be the first part of the resurrection? Noah and his family were not saved from all the effects of the flood. God delivered those on the ark through the flood, 2 Peter 2 and verse 9. It is possible that not all 8 souls on the ark were believers. God always has a remnant of believers physically on this earth. The flood is just one of many examples of his protective hand over that remnant. To try and use the flood as an example of a pre-tribulational rapture comes up short of what the scripture actually presents. In my book, The Rapture from the Ground Up, Chapter 6 on patterns in Scripture, I show that Scripture does not provide any valid pattern that shows or demonstrates a pre-tribulational rapture. All these types or patterns of a pre-tribulational rapture are cunningly devised fables. I refer you to 2 Peter 1:16, and fall quickly apart when evaluated honestly and using a literal interpretation of the Scripture. Each of these patterns do not present an honest interpretation of Scripture and is a form of begging the question in order to arrive at a predetermined conclusion. The days of Noah argument is one of many fallacies used to build a pre-tribulational rapture position. Garbage in on any kind of evaluation or study will always end up having garbage come out. You will never arrive at God's truth if your basic assumptions are flawed. The question comes down to whether one believes in what the Bible actually presents, or does one believe in a fable that is orchestrated to reinforce an erroneous rapture position. Based on the Bible and not a twisted concept of it, the days of Noah parable does not and cannot represent a type or a representative of a pre-tribulational rapture. Don't take my word on any of this. Check it out for yourself. 2 Timothy 2:15, study to show thyself approved unto God, a workman that needeth not to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. Acts 17:11, these were more noble than those in Thessalonica, in that they received the word with all readiness of mind, and searched the scriptures daily, whether those things were so. Only then can you be sure that you are not being deceived during these last days. Jesus gave us a warning to believers in Matthew 24:4 regarding the end times. Again, for more information regarding this topic and other related topics, I highly recommend either of my books, The Rapture from the Ground Up or The Great Tribulation. Thank you for watching and for listening.